Welcome to Dittofi. My name is Ugo, and I'm a solutions architect for Dittofi. In this video, I'm going to show you how to implement pagination. So pagination is used to ensure that we're not getting all the information that we have in our data tables. As your business is going to grow, the amount of information that you may have in a single table, such as user comments or posts, will get into the millions. And fetching all that information and rendering it in the user interface or the front end is going to be very costly one, and it's going to cause a bad user experience for your customers because their devices will start becoming laggy. So the simple solution for this is to limit the amount of information that we retrieve from the data tables. So I'm going to be working in the abject directories, and we created a backend action called get directories, which is a simple endpoint that fetches all the information that we have in the directory table. In order to implement pagination, we're going to have to switch the type from basic to custom. So the custom allows you to write code, and the data tables that we use in Dittofi are powered by MySQL, and MySQL runs on uses SQL query language in manipulating the information that we have in the data tables. So instead of writing code, what I did was to go to ChatGPT and I asked a simple question: can you provide a SQL query that returns a list of items from a table in the order of ID and adds pagination? So we can simply copy this sample SQL query that ChatGPT gave us, and we can paste it here. So we simply want to select all from the table. So the table we want to select from is called directory, and we want to order it by ID. So the ID is the primary key of the directory table. So if you remember in our table, we have the first column, which is always the primary key, which is always the ID column. So once it's ordered, so that we will be sure of what information that we're returning to the front end. And then the limit and offsets. Now we're going to pass the limit and offsets as variables. So to reference a variable in this box is to use the $ followed by a number. So we'll call the limit $1 and the offset $2. So it has to be in ascending order. And then we're going to remove trailing white space. So we're going to click save first because we need to create a variable. So we're going to create two query variables, limit and offset, and we're going to pass it to the query. So the limit and the offset. So it has to be numbers. This has to be a number. Click save. Then we pass the variable. So we get it from the endpoint, the limits, which is the first one, and then the variable offset, which is the second one. And now we're required to provide a custom model. So in the previous videos, we already had a custom model called directory listing, which maps the same table columns that we have in the directory. So I'm going to show you after this. So when we click save, then we're going to need to build a code. So we'll build the code shortly so we can test it out. So this shouldn't take up to 2 minutes. So what we did here was to change the type of, change the way we fetch information from the table. So we're using a custom query, and the query was generated using ChatGPT. And then we use variables to reference the limit and offset, which is going to be received from the front end. So we're going to test the code. So let's say we want to receive just 3 items and the offset is 0. So as you can see, we get the first 3 items from the table. So now the offset is simply tells the database where to start from. So 0, the information of our database are indexed. So our index, they start from 0. So if we want to get the second page of information, we simply change the offset to 3 because we've already gotten the first 3, 0, 1, 2. So we start with 3, then we run, click the run. 1 second. So then we click the run button. So as you can see, we get 4, 5, 6. Then if we want to get the third page, we simply add 3 to this, to 6. So we've gotten 0, 0 to 5. So then we're going to get 6, 7, and 8. So we get 3 information. And then another thing I want to show you is for you to use the custom query, we needed to create a custom model directory listing. So this is something we did in the past. So this directory listing, as you can see, the labels match exactly the same as what we have here. And so because we want to retrieve all the information from the data table. So that's it. So the next step now is to go to the front end. So we're going to come to the front end and we're going to create variables. So I've already created 2 variables, a current offset, which is the name and it has a kind of number. And then we have another variable called directories limits, which has a default value of 3. So the limit is the maximum amount of information we want to get from the database. So we attached a repeating action to this table row. We're going to attach the backend action we just created, which is the get directories backend action. And then we're going to attach some variables to it. So we're going to pass the app variable we just created as the current offset, sorry, the directory limits, to the limit option, and then the offset to the offset option. And we click away from it. And so then we're going to add some buttons. So let's add a div underneath this. Then we'll add 2 buttons. One, we'll copy this. And we'll paste after. So let's make this centralized. So effects, justify, center. I can also type it here. And then we're going to add some margin to this button. So we can just give it a class add margin. And then we're going to add some spacing. So 10 px. Then we'll name the button previous and next. Right. So the next step for us is to add front-end actions for the previous and the next button. So let's create a front-end action first for the previous button. So basically, we'll call it previous directories. We'll save it. Now all we need to do is simply subtract the offset. So remember, the offset simply tells the database where to start from. So it's indexed. So it starts from 0. So when you pass the current offsets to the database, the current offset starts from 0. By passing 0, we're telling the database to retrieve the first item. So, and then the limit tells us the maximum amount of items that we should return. So if we have a limit of 10 and an offset of 0, we're getting the first 9 records, So we're going to simply subtract. Yes. Hold on a second. We're going to simply subtract the current offset by directories limits. And click save. So basically, if the current offset is 3 and the directory limit is 3, when you subtract 3 from 3, you get 0. So what this is going to do is that it's going to be passing, we're going to get the first 3 or the first 3 records from the database. So click save. We create another front-end action. We'll call it next directories. And here we'll be adding the limits to the offset. All right, so we'll simply add the limit to the offset. So whenever we add, so for example, the current offset is 0, the direction limit is 3. The result of this operation is that the current offset is going to be 3. And that's how it's going to be. So now the benefit of using a repeating action. The benefit of using a repeating action that's linked to the backend action is that whenever the current offsets and the directory limit changes, it automatically fetches records. So the previous and next button, all they need to do is simply perform operations on the app variable so that more records are returned. So we're going to bind the previous and next buttons to the front-end action we just created. So which is previous directories. And then this is going to be bound to the next directories. All right, so the next step now is to ensure that the table cells are correctly bound to the backend action items. So for example, the image, we need to use the data from the backend action, which will be stored in the rows. And then we'll find the image. We'll double check that. A second. All right, so double check row image, and then this is the name that's used. Name, category, the address, and then it created out. All right, so then we view the code. Okay, so this shouldn't take up to 2 minutes. All right, then we preview the page. All right, as you can see, we get 3 records, so we'll click the next button. We get the next 3, next button. We get the next 3, previous button, we get the previous 3, we get the previous 3. So on additional bonuses, we don't want the previous button to go past 0. 0 is the first. The 0, the current offset is when it's 0, we don't want it to go past 0. So what we can do is that we can add a conditional statement. And let's add a conditional statement. We'll click on the previous button, we'll click on the no show formula, or we can just find the variable, current offset, we'll go back. Then we want to make sure the current offset is less than, we want to ensure that the current offset only, the previous button only shows when the current offset is greater than 0. So we'll click OK, we'll build the code. It won't take up to 2 minutes. And we go to our page, refresh. So as you can see, because we're getting the first page of information, the previous button doesn't show up. Data is still loading. Refresh one more time. We get information, we click next. We get information, we click next button again. We get information, we click the previous button, and we don't click previous button anymore. So thank you for watching. So what we did here was to implement pagination so that we don't get all the information that we have in the database at once. So the first thing we did was to create a backend action called get directories. So initially in this project, we already had an action called get directories, which was a simple basic action that gets all the information from the database. So what we did instead was to create a custom query. We changed the type to use a custom query. And then we got an SQL code from ChatGPT telling us how to implement pagination on our table. And then for the limit and offsets, we make sure that it's passed as variables to this particular backend action. So this information is gotten from the front end. And then we create a custom model that simply looks like the data model, the directory data model that we already have. And then the next step was to create a front-end action. So the front-end action was simply updating the app variables that we just created. And so the front-end action simply increments the current offsets or decrements the current offset. Making those changes automatically trigger the backend action to get more information from the database. And so Dittofi make things so much easier. So thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon. Have a lovely day. All right.